Hello there, welcome to the Jellyfish Journals. My name is Susie and this is Voldemort. We actually call him Bubba because Voldemort's a mouthful. And I thought for this book review video, I would do things a little differently. Usually I hold up the book if it's a physical copy, but I realized in my last video that I talked about how beautiful some of the covers were. And when I went back and watched, I think holding the book up was not really letting you guys see how beautiful some of these covers were. So what I'm going to try this time is to just put the image of the book up next to me like I do when I show an audiobook or a digital book. So we'll give this a try, and I will also say I am really still trying to figure out how I want to do these book reviews. I've watched a lot of these reviews and I don't know. I'm not very good at just casually sitting down and talking about books. These are obviously my own opinions, my own thoughts, but I don't know. I don't know what I could do to make these videos a little better or a little more appealing or help people connect to them a little bit more. So if you have any suggestions for me, please leave them in the comments. I would really like to make my review videos better because I love talking about books and I love talking about my thoughts on books. So we're going to try a few things a little differently this time. Bear with me. If something's better in this video than it has been in other videos if you've watched, or if you liked something I did better in an older video, please let me know. I want these to be good because I have a lot of fun filming these, so I just want them to, I guess, resonate the way I'm hoping that they do with others that love to read and talk about books as well. So let's go ahead and jump in. These are the books I read in February, which means hopefully my memory is a little better than the book review I just did for January, which was a couple months ago, and my memory was not that great. So let's go ahead and jump on in. The first book I read in February was The Housemaid's Secret by Freida McFadden. And she's another one of those popcorn thriller authors where I like to kind of bounce in, have a quick snack of one of her books, if you will, and then move on to something else. So super quick, easy reads. If you enjoyed The Housemaid, I actually like The Housemaid's Secret a little bit better than The Housemaid. I do have her third book, The Housemaid is Watching, have not read that yet. I gave The Housemaid's Secret 4 stars. Again, I've said this a lot before, but a thriller has to really knock my socks off. It has to be just something completely different than anything I've read. And this was, you know, kind of a typical thriller. Something mysterious is happening and the main character has to figure it out. There's definitely some twists in there. Some of it I kind of figured out as I went, but honestly, I liked it better than The Housemaid. And I will never turn down a Freida McFadden book. I think she's a phenomenal author, super fun to read, and just, yeah, quick and easy if you're looking for something light to read. After The Housemaid's Secret, I finished an audiobook called The Bees. Now, I said in my last video, if a book talks about bees, has a bee on the cover, is connected with bees somehow, I don't know why, I'm just likely to pick it up and read it. I don't know what it is. I picked up this book with the cover you see here a while back, and I thought it sounded really cool. It was literally about bees, but it was a fiction story. And it's about this one bee who I guess was supposed to be born as a sanitation bee, like to help clean the hive. But she's got some pheromones or something, and there's something different about her that lets her do different jobs in the hive, which is not normal. I accidentally listened to this on audiobook, and I say accidentally because I try to only listen to audiobooks if I don't have the physical copy already. When I was looking through my Boundless app, just for the heck of it, I went to the sci-fi section, found this book, and I thought, oh, that's cool, another book about bees. So I listened to it, and it wasn't until I got into it, and then I came home and I looked and I was like, it is the same book, but they had different covers. So the cover in the app where I listen to my audiobooks was different than the cover you see here, which is the print cover I have at home. And, I will say, I gave the book 2 stars. I thought it was super creative and a super cool idea. I just think it kind of went on, and it honestly, there definitely was an underlying plot. There definitely was, like, I don't even know if I'd call it a plot, like an underlying connected story from the beginning to the end, but everything felt loose. It felt like things would walk away from that story and then kind of happen a bit, and then somehow it would come back to that story, but then it would drift apart again, and then it would come back to it. And there was something about it that just kind of felt disconnected the whole time. I did think it was creative that pretty much anything that could happen to a bee happens in this book. I don't think anybody got squished, actually, now that I think about it, or stung anybody. So maybe not everything that could happen to a bee. But you name it, an animal comes and tries to get the hive. There's people at the beginning and the end of it. I'm trying to think of what else. There's wasps that come in and try to take over the hive. And I loved the idea of it. I wanted to love this book so much. I just did not care about the characters. Something about, I know it's fiction, but I think something about knowing that beehives just don't work this way made it a little tricky. There was some attempt to overthrow the queen, if I remember right. And yes, I know that there's some of that happening in nature, but I don't know how to explain it. I say, if you're like me and you like to read things about books or about bees, go ahead and give this book a try. Again, I gave it 2 stars. It wasn't as interesting as I thought it would be, but I will keep it on my shelf because it's a pretty cover and it has bees in the title, and I don't know why, but I just kind of love that. So moving on, the next one I read was a digital book called The Usual Silence, and this was a really interesting story. So there's this little boy who does not talk at all. I believe, if I remember right, he's autistic, doesn't talk at all. And there's this other underlying secret mystery type thing. And the boy's mother seeks out this particular therapist to help her son. And she's seeking out this particular therapist because it's connected to that mystery, that underlying story. And this therapist ends up doing therapy sessions at some cabins up in the woods. It's like family counseling and stuff. And sorry, there's so much cat hair down here, guys, and it just tickles my nose. And anyway, it all kind of culminates at the end. I gave this book 4 stars because truthfully, I did not see the ending coming. Some of the book kind of dragged on a little bit and wasn't super interesting for me, but I did love how it all came together at the end. So I recommend The Usual Silence. I would probably read this again. And honestly, if I found this at my library's annual book sale or in a little free library or something, I would definitely snag it for my shelf. Don't think I would go pay full price for it, only because I've read it already. So, but it kind of hung on, and it was one of those books where you kind of read it and you're like, whew, that would be horrible if that was my life, if that was my story. So go for it. All right, on to my reading challenge book for February. I read The Boy in the Suitcase, and I owe a huge apology to anybody who watched I think it was my February reading journal setup video. I don't know where I had it in my head that this was based on a true story. It's not based on a true story. It is completely fiction, and I am so sorry if anybody heard that, thought it sounded good, and went out and bought it or checked it out at the library or anything. I'm not gonna lie, I thought it was based on a true story. It sounded super exciting, really interesting, I guess, maybe more than exciting. But I bought this book at my library book sale because I thought it was based on a true story. I don't know why. Is there a story like this out there somewhere that I'm remembering? I don't know. I should do my own research, I guess. But it was really good. I gave this book 5 stars. This woman is asked by a friend to pick up a suitcase in a locker. I believe this takes place in Sweden, Norway, up that way somewhere. And she's asked to pick up this suitcase out of a locker and not to look inside of it. So of course, that means obviously she's going to look inside of it and there's a boy in there. And the main character who picked up the suitcase, it's kind of her trying to keep this boy safe. If I remember right, he's not talking. He's really young. Obviously, he's terrified. And it kind of follows a few different storylines of a few different people. And then they all kind of connect at the end and you find out how they overlap. And I really love books like that. I think it's kind of interesting because I think when you read a book like that, these characters are being introduced into the story for a reason. That they're going to connect somehow. But then sometimes when you see how they connect and either how tightly their lives have intertwined and they haven't known it, or how maybe just passing by each other on the street one day connected them. I don't know. Sometimes I think that's where an author's power is how did those connections begin? How did all of that start in the first place? And so I highly recommend this book. I believe I'm not sure if it's a series. I feel like there's a few different books based on the same detectives. I could be wrong. They are European books, so it's translated. But the challenge for February was to read a book with more than one author, and so this fit the bill. But I would definitely pick up another one of these. I thought it was really well done. After that, I finished another audiobook in February. This one was called In Miniature, and this book was about tiny things. And before I get too far, I want to be clear, not necessarily tiny things, but smaller versions of the actual sized thing. So for example, if you built a Lego Eiffel Tower and it fits in your living room, they're considering that a miniature in the book because it's much smaller than the actual Eiffel Tower. So I read this book because I'm not gonna lie, most people I think like miniatures, especially crafty people, and I consider myself a crafty person. When I was a little girl, my dad built me this 3-story dollhouse, and I was excited. I could not wait. I wanted to decorate this thing. I must have been like 10 maybe. I'm sure maybe he can remind me later, but I was pretty young. Anyway, we got to the part of the dollhouse where we were gonna wire electricity through it, and I don't remember what happened. I might have burned out on it. I mean, kids are fickle. I was just as fickle as every other child. I don't know if my dad ended up with a lot of work all of the sudden and just didn't have the time to do it, and that's why I got bored with it, or I got bored with it and so he got caught up in stuff. Who knows? But long story short, I ended up selling it for like $30 at a yard sale. And to this day, I regret it. Now, granted, obviously going through life now, I'm like, I have no idea where I would have put this thing in all the different homes I've lived in and through my first marriage and having little kids of my own at some point. But there is this huge part of me that still wants a dollhouse, and I just want to play with the miniatures and decorate and everything. So I thought this book would be really great. And a lot of the book is pretty interesting, especially the chapter where he talks about miniature books. If you have never looked up, and I am talking teeny, teeny, tiny books, Google it. It's unbelievable what people can create in miniature. But a lot of the book also talked about those not so tiny miniatures. So like a giant train I don't even want to call it a train track, like train village, train city, or whatever, in, I think it's Germany. There were just other things that were talked about where they're smaller than normal size, but not necessarily what I was thinking about, teeny tiny. Again, I'm not sure with these nonfiction books how to read up enough to know exactly what it's going to be about, especially if I'm looking into it as an audiobook. But I gave it 3 stars. I thought it was really interesting, and I definitely enjoyed it. I mostly listened to it on my long walks, but it was, again, not quite what I was hoping to get out of it. I was hoping for more of, like, how do people create these teeny tiny things? What's their process and things like that? So again, I think I just keep disappointing myself. I need to figure out more how to dig in if it's an audiobook. So, but usually I pick them on the fly mid-walk, because one book ends and I need another one right away. So who knows, but I liked it. After that, I read When She Returned by Lucinda Berry. And this book, it is Lucinda Berry. This book, I think I've read The Good Son or The Good Child or something like that by Lucinda Berry before, and I really liked it. I just completely forgot about her. I don't own, actually that's not true. I think I own one Lucinda Berry. Yes, I own Keep Your Friends Close. But this book, When She Returned, made me want to start getting more of Lucinda Berry's books. I loved this book. This mom disappears out of her car in a parking lot, and for years they have no idea where she is, and then she suddenly returns. And I don't want to say too much about that, but it had such a good twist. And even though I saw this twist coming, I think what won me over to give this book 5 stars was all I kept thinking of is, like, again, that whole what if this happened to me factor. This whole, like, I can't believe somebody would go through this, and this would happen after that, and this would happen after that. And there's a stepmom involved, and as a stepmom, sometimes I reflect that way, and I think, how would I handle this as the second wife, as the stepmother? And so being able to put myself in the character's shoes on so many different levels, as the mother, as the stepmother, and even in some ways as the daughter in the story, I just really felt connected to this book on a lot of levels. Not that any of this has happened to me, but I guess just that whole, like, what would I do? So yeah, I recommend this book a lot. And if you haven't read anything by Lucinda Berry, I definitely recommend it. If you have any recommendations by her, please add them below. I am definitely going to start keeping my eyes open for her books more often when I'm out at thrift stores and stuff, just to see if I can build my collection of her books, because I feel like these will stick with me. Then I read Peony in Love by Lisa C. Lisa C is one of my very favorite authors. Not in the same way like I enjoy Frida McFadden. Like Frida McFadden, I'll just pick it up and read it and plug through it as fast as I can. Lisa C makes me think differently about the world. And I don't want that to sound too, like, lofty or elevated, but I guess her books are usually set in China. As far as I know, they're all set in China. This is my 3rd Lisa C book that I've read. I was hooked from the first book I read, The Tea Girl of Hummingbird Lane. I just loved her right away. And then a friend recommended The Island of Sea Women, and I loved that one as well. And so now I've read Peony in Love, and this book is about a young girl who is supposed to get married and secretly meets this other guy and wants to marry him instead. But Chinese culture at the time, that was not going to happen. And she wasn't even supposed to have seen this other guy, so she couldn't talk about it or anything. And she basically dies of heartache. And so the rest of the story is her ghost and the Chinese cultures that are attached to a ghost or a family member that's passed on. So I'm sorry if this is cheapening the culture at all, but if you've seen Mulan, this is my background for Chinese culture. I apologize. Um, I know that they honor their ancestors, and I know that they seek advice from their ancestors and things like that. Well, because of how she died and because she was unmarried when she died, she was unable to be honored as an ancestor the same way. And so there were things about her culture that affected her ghost self and where her ghost self was allowed to go and what her ghost self was allowed to do. And it was all based on Chinese belief and Chinese culture. And I just thought it was fascinating. Again, I have no problem admitting that I am ignorant in a lot of those areas. And reading something like this, it really just blows my mind. I'm a Christian. I grew up pretty much going to church in America. I come from a, middle class privileged family. I'm still middle class privileged person. And I'll be honest, I don't always give a lot of thought to these really rich cultures that have existed for centuries, and how these things impact them. Like, for example, if you die as a young person, or how does it impact the family when a young daughter dies unmarried, and things like that. So again, that's what I mean when I say Lisa C. opens my eyes a little bit, and just kind of, they say books take you to a new world or help you travel the world and all of that. And I firmly believe that with Lisa C. Probably won't read one of her books in March, but I'm hoping in April. I think I'd like to get through a lot of them by the end of this year if I can, because I feel like I learn a lot about this whole other part of the world I've never been to. Then I read The Whispers, and this was by Audrey Audrain, I believe. And I gave this book 4 stars. I've also read her other book, The Push, which I believe I gave 4 stars to also. That was an audiobook I listened to. And I just think she's a great author. So it takes place on this street, and it kind of starts off with this mom who everything looks perfect in her world. And at a barbecue or some backyard party, the neighbors hear her scream at her son. I guess her son is very difficult. I think he's 10 or something. Anyway, he eventually ends up falling out of his bedroom window and ends up in the hospital. And the rest of the book is the different neighbors' stories, and not so much about that incident, but just kind of one of those, like I talked about On a Quiet Street in my last book review video. And I think I might have sort of mixed it up with this book because they have similar plot lines where, different neighbors have different viewpoints of what happened, and, the neighbors kind of come together, and by the end you hear the whole story. I'm not doing this book a lot of justice right now. I think I got this book at a yard sale, not gonna lie. I bought it because the cover's gorgeous. I think at the time I had not listened to The Push, so I didn't know anything about this author. But no regrets. I thought it was a really good story. I keep looking over there because I put the book over in the wrong spot for some reason on the printer instead of on my shelf. And the cat's sleeping on the floor, staring at me. So I get distracted very easily. Hi, ADHD. Or ADD. Anyway, I recommend this book. I also recommend The Push. If you liked either one of these, definitely read the other. And I haven't done any research, but if she's written any other books, let me know down in the comments. I will probably forget as soon as I walk away from this video, but I think she's another author I would not mind getting more of her books. I just think she is really good at telling a story, and pacing it well. And that's super important to me. I don't like it when books drag on, and I also don't like it when books just get to the point too fast. And I think Audrey Audrain is very good at pacing her stories so that you're still stuck, you still want to keep reading, you still are enjoying it, and by the time you get to the end, you're ready to be done with the book. And I don't think that's easy to do, and so kudos to Audrey. Then I read Cobble Hill. This was a book I remember pulling out of a little free library in my neighborhood, And I don't normally read books like this. The cover's kind of cutesy. And again, it's another one of those books where a lot of things happen on a street or in this little neighborhood. And it's really about how all these neighbors are connected. So kind of combining this idea of like a neighborhood with different perspectives of what's going on, and other element that I like where all of these people end up overlapping and connecting throughout the story. I gave this one 4 stars. It was a fun read, not my normal kind of book, but it's the kind of book where I definitely could see myself recommending to some friends of mine who don't like the thrillers, don't like mysteries, don't like a lot of bad language or graphic sexual scenes, things like that. This is a good fit for that. It was a good story with just enough of that mystery and intrigue in it. So I recommend Cobble Hill. And then I read How to Solve Your Own Murder. This had been on my TBR for a while. I should say my audiobook. No, let me rephrase. This had actually been on my Amazon wish list for a while. And I kept wanting to buy it. Every time I went to Barnes & Noble, I'd look for it. They never had it in stock. And if it's not there, I'm not so hard up to buy it that I need them to send it to me in the mail. So I saw it on my Boundless app for audiobooks. So I thought, okay, let me just do this. And that way, if I don't like it, whatever, I've already listened to it. It wasn't on my physical shelf. I will be honest, didn't love it. This girl finds out that she's inherited or in line to inherit this big house, this big mansion that she didn't even know she was in line to inherit. I'm not sure if she even really remembers that she was related to this person. Basically, this woman gets a fortune when she's a child that says how she's going to die. And she becomes obsessed her entire life with how she is going to solve her own murder. And she's determined to solve her own murder and figure out who it is that's going to kill her. Well, she's unsuccessful. And so this, I want to say it's a grandniece, something like that. Like not like a granddaughter or something obvious. It's like some distant cousin or something. Who's related to her. She leaves part of her house to her, or somehow she's involved in this inheritance. Guys, I'm terrible at this. I'm doing my best, I promise. And so anyway, this girl comes and they find out in the will that whoever does solve the murder is going to be the inheritor of the estate. And so there's other family members involved. And of course, the town thought this lady was crazy. And some of her family thought she was crazy because she was going to solve her own murder and all this. And I liked it, but I just didn't feel connected to any of the characters. There were a lot of really interesting clues that came really quickly at the beginning of the story. And you're, kind of like, ooh, how's that connected? And how did somebody pull that off? And what does that have to do with it? And then I feel like during the course of listening to the story, maybe something was solved here and maybe a few chapters later, some other part was solved. But I guess I feel like there wasn't that full wrap up at the end, that kind of like Knives Out, where he sits down and explains how it all came together at the end. And sometimes I think, especially when I'm listening to an audiobook, I kind of need that. I kind of need someone to just pull it all together for me at the end. I just felt like I kept getting lost during the story and not remembering why this clue was relevant, or a clue that seemed really, really important turned out to be nothing at all. And I don't know, it just kind of felt a little discombobulated to me. I think it had a lot of potential. I gave it 3 stars. I would recommend it. I think my mom would probably like this book, to be honest. I think she would find it kind of adorable, and not in a cutesy way, but just I don't know, kind of just a nice murder mystery. So I definitely don't want to hate on it. It just wasn't for me. Wasn't my kind of book, I guess. So glad I didn't purchase it. Glad I listened to it, but definitely not for me. Then I read Anxious People by Frederick Bachman, and I I love this author. I really do. I know he's popular. I know Beartown's the big thing. I've read Beartown, but I guess after I read that, then the other books came out. So I need to go back and read them all together. And of course, I've read A Man Called Ove. But I loved Anxious People. I thought this book was so unique, and I'm always looking for that book that's just different. So this person tries to rob a bank, and they kind of stink at it. And so they end up in this apartment with all of these other people. It was an open house, if I remember. And the book is basically about how this terrible bank robber interacts with these people at the open house that are essentially being held hostage now by this bank robber. And I think Frederick Bachman is very, very good at writing relationships. Relationships that have existed, relationships that are beginning to be created or established, relationships that have gone wrong. I think that's why he's such a popular author. I think he does this really good job of writing people. And I don't know. It was, again, another book where as I was reading, I kept thinking, how would I react in this situation and what would I do? And I just loved it, every bit of it. Highly recommend. It was just a really good book. A lot of self-reflection from the characters, and I don't know, I feel like I'll ramble. I just really loved it. If you like Frederick Bachman and you haven't read this, I would say make this your next read by him for sure. And finally, the last book I read in February was The Girl Next Door. I am going to tell you, this was based on a true story, which I did not know. So there was a book I thought was based on a true story. I was wrong. This book was based on a true story. I had no idea. This book was horrifying. I'm not going to lie. I don't read a lot of horror. I do say, for the most part, books don't affect me. I read it, it's a story, I close it, put it down, and walk away. It's a lot like movies for me. I know the point is for me to be entertained and have a good time while I'm in it. I'm not much of a laugh out louder when I read. I'm not a crier when I read. And I think this book would impact a lot of people. So if you're that kind of reader where a book impacts you, or you're the kind of reader that has to close a book and walk away for a bit, this might not be for you. It was pretty awful. Not the writing, not the book, but what happens to the characters. So this, it's set, I think, in the Midwest, I want to say in the 50s. And basically it's this dead-end street or a cul-de-sac with all these boys on it. There's a couple girls on the street too, like sisters of some of the boys. And it's basically about how these two girls end up having to move in with their aunt. And essentially one of them is tortured by the boys on the street. And when I say tortured, I mean they chain her up, tie her up in the basement, and pretty much do whatever they want to her. I don't want to say much more than that. It is based on a true story. Like I said, there is a movie like it. I will not be watching the movie. I can handle a lot of stuff, but this is truly heartbreaking that this happened and was allowed to happen. I think what kept me reading the book and what I did love about the book, and I gave it 5 stars, was the boy, one of the boys in the neighborhood. It's the whole story's told from his perspective. And he was, if I remember right, he was 12. My daughter's 13. So, the same age as the boys my daughter goes to school with. But it was really about his wrestle of right and wrong. And it was really fascinating to me because as I'm reading this book, I'm thinking, how can you not know that what you're doing is wrong? How can you not know that you don't do this, that this is horrible? But I tried to step back and think about it, and the boy explains in the book, there was an adult involved in the torture. The aunt was a part of it. She was allowing this. She was encouraging this. And so somewhere in this 12-year-old boy's mind, he had it warped that, okay, there's an adult involved, this must be okay if an adult is letting this happen. And I think, not excusing any of it, but keeping in mind, I work with children and I'm always trying to understand them, and keeping in mind that this was a 12-year-old boy. He didn't have any siblings of his own. His parents worked a lot and he hung out more at this other family's house. I think it made sense in a weird way. It made sense that he had never had to draw those lines between right and wrong before. And I don't want to give anything away, but he does, you see the wrestle, I guess is the point. And that was the part that kept me engaged in the book, is that you see this boy's wrestle as he is trying to figure out how do I make this right? And so again, please don't pick it up on my recommendation if you know this is not the book for you. But if you are interested in psychology, if you're interested in what makes kids tick, how kids perceive things, I think there was I think there was a good job done of upholding that end of things. So I did February on a bit of a somber note. Anyway, those are all the books that I read in February. Let me know in the comments. Again, anything I can do to make these videos better, anything that they were better at before that I should change, and or any thoughts you have on any of the books that I've talked about. I hope you guys have a great day. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Bye.